Watch out!
Hey, can we get a little help over here?
You know it and I know it. Kids today aren't getting enough physical education. Shh! Truth is, active kids do better in class because time in the gym isn't just good for their hearts. It's good for their brains. So help keep your dinner, library, and coffee shop out of the game. Do you know if your kids are getting enough PE? Protect PE at voicesforhealthykids.org/.
Every year, more than 15,000 people aren't there anymore because they accidentally or knowingly misused an opioid and pain medication. Gone because someone was careless. If you've been prescribed opioids, please don't take chances. Follow your dosage plan exactly. Keep track of your meds, store them securely, dispose of them properly, and never, ever share. Drugs can help control the pain, but it's up to you to control your drugs. Because isn't there enough pain already?
Welcome back to Insight. When you provide an education to all children, that education could come in a variety of ways. Insight producer Joel Black
now call the February 25th, 2020 meeting of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education to order. I will now entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
Motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
All right. All in favor of adopting? Show of hands. All right. Thank you very much. So before we move on, I just want to acknowledge tremendous community leaders in the room. And in particular, we have some elected officials and some former elected officials. So I'd like to acknowledge our former board chair, Mary McRae. And I see county commissioners, Susan Rodriguez McDowell from District 6, Elaine Powell, vice chair of the county commission from District 1. I saw Commissioner Doma Leak outside, but I don't, so I think she's still outside. And from Huntersville, I saw Mayor Pro Tem Melinda Bales, Town Commissioner Lance Munger, and I also see the brand new one-day Matthews Commissioner Ken McCool. So, thank you to all our intergovernmental partners and community partners for being here tonight. Is there a motion that the board approve the consent agenda items?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
And before we move to a vote, does any board member wish to pull any part of this item for individual consideration? All right. If no, okay.
I would like to, I would like to at least highlight item D,
So let me get that.
which is the ad hoc committee on compliance.
Okay, so you want to, do you want to pull that?
But, no, just if we can.
You want to
highlight
speak to it
after
at the
vote,
end?
speak to it
All
after the
right.
vote, yes.
All right. So all in favor of the motion, let it be known by a show of hands. And that is unanimous. And would you like to speak to item
Yes.
D?
So there is an ad hoc committee working on the chief compliance officer. And we originally approved a charter for that committee to have 3 members. We just, by consent, approved it to have a 4th member, and that is Dr. Ruby Jones, who will be serving on that committee along with myself, Mr. Strain, and Chair Dashu. Just wanted to highlight that, and thank you, Dr. Jones, for joining us.
Yeah. And Superintendent, did you want to speak to the Vance honor?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, board members, for, we've actually approved the consent. Right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you all for approving the recommendation to name the E Hall at Vance High School in honor of Dr. Curtis Carroll. As you may know, Dr. Carroll will be retiring this week after a 36-year career in public education. Nearly 3 decades of those years have been spent here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools in a variety of roles, including the past 17 months as the proud principal of Vance High School, which sits in District 3, where Dr. Jones represents. There are several people here tonight from the Vance community, and I would like to ask you if you all could please stand for a moment. And these, obviously, these represent students, parents, administrators, teachers who brought this request forward to name the E Hall Carroll's Way. And so I want to thank you all for bringing that forward, and I want to thank the board again for approving the recommendation.
All right, and at this time, we will begin our work session regarding the 2017 bonds with a eagerly awaited update from the superintendent and staff.
Madam Chair and board members, I would like to share some information with you about the status of our projects from the 2017 bond referendum. As you know, we have found construction costs are rising faster than the inflation formula that was provided by the county for our planning purposes. That means that right now, we don't have enough money to complete all of the projects that were promised in the 2017 bond. We will have a couple of options available to us to address this shortfall. However, including seeking support from our funding partners at Mecklenburg County, I am going to ask Carol Stamper, our Deputy Superintendent for Operations, Dennis Lacaria, our recently hired real estate consultant, to explain some of the options and how we arrived at some tentative choices. They will be joined by Chiquita Lloyd, who oversees our MWSBE program, and Akeisha Craven-Howe, who oversees magnets and student assignment. A couple of points that I'd like for you all to keep in mind as we have the conversation this evening. We will be sharing some information with the community in town hall meetings for the next month or so in an effort to be transparent and to dispel any misinformation and disinformation in the public discussion on the bonds. It is our intent and our goal to deliver all projects in the 2017 bond. And this presentation and the upcoming meetings that we'll have in the public are focused on that goal. With that, I will turn it over to Ms. Carol Stamper.
And you actually get me up front, so thank you, Mr. Superintendent, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the board. It's an honor for us to be here this evening, and you can see we're taking a look back briefly to set some context and provide some background information on where we are today. We'll give you a look at where things are currently, and we will talk about next steps. A term that's come out of this.
Just sorry, really quickly, before you dive into this, I just want to ask board members to hold your questions until the end of the presentation, and then at the end of the presentation, ask everything that you need to ask, including all the questions you've been getting from your constituents, but we're going to hold that until the end.
Thank you. And so one of the terms that kind of arose organically from the team as we were working through this is it's a need to refresh and a need to evolve. And so we will walk through things like how the school bonds actually do more than just build buildings. I think it's important for our public to understand how else the actual construction projects themselves and the bond dollars that we're spending benefit this community. We'll give you program updates about the projects in the bond. We'll talk about the first steps in the long-range master planning process, and then we'll get into some of the questions around how much, where, and when, and some next steps. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carol Stamper.
Thank you and good evening. As we can all remember, and it was a hoorah day in November of 2017 when our voters and our community supported the largest bond that CMS has ever had. And that was total engagement in this community, and it was total support and total trust that we were doing the right thing for our staff and our students. And that engagement did not stop on the night that you voted for that bond. The engagement process continues, and for this $922 million huge investment, it is vitally important that you as our stakeholders be involved in every step of the way of the progress on our projects. That has been going on actually since 2017. Shortly after and even before, but shortly after we passed the bond, we began to hold facility charrettes and community engagement and information sessions. And since 2017, during the course of 2018, and during the course of 2019, and even to date, we have held over 20 information and engagement sessions. So those will continue. Let me say clearly that they will absolutely continue for those projects that have not started. We will keep you informed on the progress of our bond projects as they go along. And so the engagement is very, very important and very necessary for the input on these projects. Another way of building in our community and engaging our community are with our business partners and also with our workforce development. Ms. Chiquita Lloyd is going to come and speak to you about those, and then I will step back up and give you a status update on our bond projects.
Thank you, Ms. Stamper. As many of you know, our NWSP program has been in place now for a little over 25 years, and I'm very proud of the hard work that we have done over the years to ensure that we include our diverse suppliers. As it relates to the 2017 bond, as it currently stands right now, we're at 31% participation for just those 17 projects. And that breaks down to a little over 11% for our minority business owners, and 19% for our women business owners, and right at 1% for our small business owners. This is strictly for those projects that are either in design or have already started construction. These are commitment numbers only. As a part of our office requirements, we then track the actual projects once they are awarded to ensure that what our construction companies have committed to, they actually deliver as it relates to the participation. But the biggest thing I wanted to highlight for us this time is when we started last year, we embarked on an effort to look to see what else could we do more as it relates to our community impact as it relates to the bonds. Because as you all know, our bonds are more than just buildings, but there are opportunities for us to educate our children on the design process. So we have partnered with our CTE office to provide that next step and that pathway for our students, as well as for our community members who are unemployed, underemployed, or who have had difficulty finding employment, who have an interest in the construction-related field. As you can see here in this photo, this is actually from our Montclair Elementary site, which Messer Construction is our construction manager for. And these students you see here pictured are from our ROC program in partnership with CPCC and with Goodwill. Each of these students had the opportunity to take what they had learned in the classroom and to go out to an actual live construction site to apply what they have learned as it relates to job safety, looking at virtual construction using the BIM, blueprint reading, erosion control, and how to do project supervision. And I'm happy to say that one of these students that are here in this picture will be hired this summer as an internship as a result of the work they've done in the classroom as well as they've done over the past couple of years. Our workforce development opportunities is a two-pronged approach, as I stated before. It's opportunities for our future, which is our students, as well as for the unemployed, underemployed, and those who are displaced. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to partner with our various community partners. So we have opportunities through the Mayor's Youth Employment Program. For this summer, our students will have opportunities to work on the internal as well as the external side of construction projects. We're partnering with CPCC, the Urban League, Goodwill, and Charlotte Works as it relates to helping to find those who are looking for jobs to be able to match with the opportunities that we're going to have. As a part of our outreach process, all of those who are bidding to us on these various jobs will let us know if they plan on hiring. And if they are hiring, which trades, and how to better focus our career fair to assist them in finding those placements with our community partners. It's been a very rewarding experience thus far. This past Saturday, we had the opportunity to partner also with our CTE office on their career fair. And we had hundreds of our students and parents come out and to be able to walk through to learn more about our various projects. We had 2 of our design firms who were there, as well as 7 of our construction firms there on hand to work with our students, to introduce them to the field, and to share what's next as far as their career path with any questions they may have. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ms. Stamper to give an update on our 2017 bond projects.
Thank you. So over the next 2 hours, we will cover, not really. Sorry, Superintendent. It is very important, though, that we go through the projects and give you a status of where we are in the progress of those. And I am pleased to report that out of the 29 projects, there is already activity on 16 of those 29 projects, or 55% of our projects are underway. That's pretty significant if you think about it. It's less than 2 years since we have been allotted funding, and we are already underway with many, many projects in our community. In 2019, we've already completed one. We delivered the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Academy. This is a new school for our Exceptional Children Specialty School. They had a dedication, if some of you happened to join us in October of 2019, That was a very, very, very special dedication for this school for these special children. Projects under construction right now and are being delivered this August of 2020. We have 3 of those. Collinswood Language Academy, we've got a replacement school that is being built on adjacent to our Smith Family Center, which is located off of Tyvola Road. Harding High School is a new gymnasium, and we have renovations to our kitchen and cafeteria. The existing gym, by the way, there will be used as an auxiliary gym, so it remains. Montclair Elementary School, there will be a new replacement school on site at Montclair. 2 other projects that are under construction, these will be delivered in August of 2021, are our 2 language immersion program schools, one in the north and one in the south. The one in the north is on our former J.M. Alexander Middle School site. The one in the south is going to be located on our former Nations Ford Elementary site. Projects that are scheduled for August 2021 completion and is scheduled to bring a construction award to our board this spring, which makes it very important. We have 5 of those. Briarwood Elementary School. This is an on-site replacement school, and it is going to be built adjacent to that school while they are in session. Sorry.
There you go.
Somebody stepped up here and pushed that. Lansdowne Elementary School, it is an on-site replacement school, and it's going to be relieving Elizabeth Lane Elementary as well. We have a new elementary school, a relief elementary school for Nations Ford, Sterling, and Still Creek. That project is going to be located on Sandy Porter Road. If you recall, board, you approved the purchase of that property. It's about almost 19 acres on the Sandy Porter Road site. Sharon Elementary School, we have a 16 classroom addition at Sharon. And our West Mecklenburg High School, we are in the process of building a new gym. And again, the auxiliary gym will remain. Two more projects that are scheduled for completion in August of 2022. And also, we are scheduled to bring a construction award to you in spring and summer. One is the new high school relief for Olympic. That is being built, located to the Palisades Elementary School. West Charlotte High School. That replacement school is going to be built on site. I think it's notable that we need to say in the public that the existing track and field that was dedicated in 2016, and it was part of the NFL Foundation Grassroots program, it will remain as a part of this construction. So that will stay there. Just as a point of reference, the last high schools that we built prior to the 2017 bonds did have 100 classrooms, and they included Rocky River, Huff, and Mallard Creek. Before I move on to the projects that are in the design phase, Ms. Akeisha Craven-Howell will come up and present some information on high school enrollment and projections.
Thank you, Carol. I know that there have been a number of questions regarding the number of classrooms in the high schools on the 2017 bond. Originally listed on the bond as 125, there have been recent conversations about perhaps having those schools at 100 classrooms. And what I want to share with you and walk through with you is just some of the thinking that informs that potential shift. As Dennis alluded to, this idea of refreshing and evolving simply some of our thinking around our planning capacity for high schools in particular has evolved. So the board may recall that when we've talked about utilization in the past, one of the 3 measures of utilization that we've talked about is the planning capacity. And the planning capacity looks at the number of classrooms in a given school times the average number of students in a classroom. And historically, across all schools and all grade levels, we've used an average of 20 students per classroom. What we know is that in high school, that number is low. compared to how high schools are actually used. One of the areas that we look at to demonstrate that is how the state allots teachers to the district. So in high school grades, the state allots teachers in 9th grade 26 and a half students. We don't cut our students in half, but 26 and a half students generate a teaching position. For grades 10 through 12, 29 students generate a teaching position. We are actually slightly more generous in CMS with our allotments, such that we allot one teacher for every 24.5 students in 9th grade and one teacher for every 26.5 students in 10th through 12th grade. So on average, about 26 students in a high school generates one teaching position. So we know that 25 students per classroom is a much more accurate number to plan with for high school than is 20. When we do that math then, when we started with the 2017 bond at 125 classrooms, we were multiplying by 20 students, and that gives you a planning capacity of 2,500 students. If we look now at 25 students per classroom, a 100 classroom high school gives you that same planning capacity of 2,500 students. So though the number of classrooms may change, the number of students we intended to accommodate in the schools does not change. In addition to planning capacity, we also look closely not just at current enrollment, but what do we project enrollment to be in the future? Because we don't want to just build a school that accommodates the students that we have today, but we want to plan forward. As we look at the 3 high schools that will be built in the 2017 bond, West Charlotte, a relief school for Olympic, as well as a relief school for the South Charlotte area, we take a look at their current planning capacities, their current enrollment, and what we project enrollment to be in 5 years. And that projection is based on a number of things. Trend analysis for population growth, demographic shifts. We also look at permitted development as well as rezoning petitions. And all of that information comes together to help us project what enrollment will look like in 5 years. I think the most important takeaway here is that you see the numbers that are circled. In each of the 3 schools, we anticipate having a number of open seats and a significant number of open seats, even with 100 classrooms, even with planning for 5-year growth. We've certainly had some feedback that we want to look further out than 5 years. We are working with cooperative strategies to help us look at what that 10-year growth will look like, also triangulating with the city of Charlotte and how they estimate growth for different parts of the city. But all indications from both of those entities is that our approach to projecting growth for 5 years is spot on, and that we're very much moving in the right direction. With that, I will turn it back over to Carol.
Thank you, Keisha. So to continue the bond status update, we do have projects now that are in the design phase. Several of those are scheduled for in August 2022 completion. They include East Mecklenburg High School. We are building a classroom addition at East Mecklenburg. Shamrock Gardens is an on-site replacement for a new elementary school. The students and the staff, however, will be swinging to Lincoln Heights Elementary School in order for us to build that on site. It was just going to be a challenging construction and almost prohibitive for the students and staff to stay. So they will go in August of 2020. This August, we will move them over to Lincoln Heights, and then they will be going back to their new home in August of 2022. This thing is very sensitive. In addition, we have some CTE upgrades in 4 of our high schools that you'll note on the slide that are scheduled to complete in 2023, and they range from technology, CTE programs, to electrical and plumbing, to culinary arts. And then we moved to, if you remember, I said we had 16 of the 29 bond projects has already started. So that leaves 13 that have not yet started, not scheduled to start just yet. I will not go through these one by one in the details, but please rest assured that we will be back as these come online and even before they do. Again, we will have our community engagement and our information sessions on all of these projects. We will get your input on the design, the exterior, the interior, and even sometimes how we arrange them on the site. So we will have those engagement sessions for these particular projects that have not yet started. You can also see these online. We will have the link so you can get all of this information there. So that's where we are, and Mr. Lacaria is going to talk a little bit about where are we going.
Going to see if this makes it any better, because that's what we're about here, is making it better. So right now, tonight, we know that we've got more questions than we have answers. And a lot of those questions center on things like how much, where, when. And so we want to start to frame those questions and answers through a more appropriate lens and not make decisions based on right where we stand in the moment, but start thinking in terms of a long-range facilities master planning process. And so in that process, we develop a capital needs assessment, which is a comprehensive look at all of the district's capital needs for a set period of time. Traditionally, that's been about 10 years. And then that capital needs assessment evolves into a capital investment plan, which then, once agreed upon, is placed before the voters as the basis for a bond referendum. And that is how we got to the 2017 bond. So tonight is the first meeting in a public process. We fully expect that this first phase of work is going to take us a year in order to complete thoughtfully, openly, transparently, and with public participation, because it's absolutely vital that we hear from the public as we move through this process. And so just to remind everybody, the last time that we undertook anything this comprehensive was back in 2005, 2006, as a result of the School Building Solutions Committee and the Superintendent Standards Review Committee, which was put together by then Superintendent Dr. Peter Gorman. In 2005, this is what Mecklenburg County looked like. We had about 830,000 residents. CMS was operating about 146 schools, and we had just a little over 120,000 students. Because of that work in 2005 and 2006, the voters supported us in the 2007 and 2013 bond initiatives. In 2016, when the run-up to this bond was occurring, Mecklenburg County had broached 1 million residents. CMS was operating about 165 schools and was almost 146,000 students. And again, because of the work that we had done going back to 2005, 2006, the voters again supported us with this bond, and we do thank you, and we appreciate that. But it's time to take a look at these things, refresh, and evolve, because here in 2020 now, Mecklenburg County has almost 1.2 million residents, and we are close to teaching 148,000 students daily at CMS. Also, just so everybody is mindful, since the 2017 bond was initially conceived in 2016, because it takes time to pull a bond together, get it out to the county commission and then to the voters, we've had 2 superintendent changes. There have been changes in the Board of Education, and there have been very significant changes to our local market and construction escalation. One of the ways that we can capture this rising valuation is really the rising value of land over time. Mecklenburg County hasn't gotten any bigger since 2005. We didn't annex Cabarrus County or take over something in upstate South Carolina. But during this period from 2005 to now, the value of the real estate and the additional investment that's been made in Mecklenburg County has taken the value of that real estate from $85.7 billion to almost $100 billion more. That means real estate is quite simply more expensive. Also, nationally, there's a rising cost of non-residential construction. This is the Turner Building Cost Index. It's an output-based index. It's nationally normed, and it's averaged across trades throughout 20 large markets in the United States of America. So the absolutes don't necessarily matter, but you can see the trend line from a construction cost index of 717 in 2005 to almost 1,200 today. And that, again, nationally. The Charlotte market has actually outstripped that. And anybody who's even tried to do a kitchen renovation in the last year or so could tell you how that's gone, right? So the costs are simply higher, but bids are higher, competition is fierce for labor, and that's driving costs up. And we'll come back to this a little bit more in the future, because the most important thing that we all need to keep in mind is that it's not about the money, it's about our students. And so as we move through this long-range facility master planning process, we're going to evaluate some of the things that were even talked about earlier tonight, our assumptions, our methodologies, and our standards. And some of those assumptions include things like, are mobiles permanent capacity? Do we just count them and say we're done? I don't think so, but that's a conversation we need to have with the community. We need to talk about student-weighted staffing and its impacts. We need to talk about where and how will new schools be located going forward. Land, as we know, is getting scarcer, the costs are rising, and we're going to need to figure out how many new schools we're going to need, what grade configurations, and how, quite frankly, to start delivering a more urban, less suburban model school. Our methodologies include things that Keisha spoke about with the planning capacities. We need to take into consideration growth methodologies and other data points that we get from our partners in the city and the towns. Some of that's already being done through the MEAC and other groups, but we want to be very intentional about making sure we're recognizing the information that each one of our municipalities share with us, and then also the rubric for project ranking, which is getting a lot of attention, but is one piece of a larger puzzle. And I'm trying to place that in its proper context tonight, because we have to get to how big or small do we want to build our schools. And you can see what we have as a current baseline, and we need to have those conversations about whether or not it's even feasible to deliver those, and if so, what those look like. Our standards are going to include things like our construction specifications, because being perfectly transparent, we could build a much cheaper school if we built it with sticks and drywall. But that's not what we do, and that's not what we value as a community. We intentionally build schools that have a 50-plus year life cycle. We're going to have to talk about things like the complement of athletic facilities at high schools going forward. Is every high school going to be able to have a competition stadium? Those things are going to have to be things that we will be dealing with for the future, not necessarily projects specific to the 2017 bond, but there may be implications. So all of this to say, we have work to do together, and it's going to take everybody in this room and a lot of folks that aren't here. Some of this work is clearly more important and more time sensitive than others, so we've got to figure out how we can answer these questions together. So I'm outlining some key considerations for our work that we will test with the community, but this, I think, will help us think about how we organize the work that we're doing. And first and foremost, we want to pay attention to what's best for students. That needs to be one of our central tenets. We need to be transparent. We also have to make sure that we're only modifying projects based on our standards. So we don't want to make a change to an entire class of buildings or schools because of one particular difficulty with one particular school. So it requires thinking big picture about the changes and the modifications at each individual school and how that impacts the overall program. Because when we go to the voters, again, we go to the voters with a program of work. The projects are within that program of work, but we need to think about our program and our programming before we start making any changes. And we need to, I think, agree that cost is not the driving factor. It's a reality. We have to weigh it, but I don't believe that we should be making decisions as a community about how we value our children just through dollars and cents. So again, we have questions and answers that we need to get to. And the first one is a hot button. We know this. Where will the new South High School be located? Well, I can't tell you that tonight. No options are currently off the table. And that is because we are pursuing other options, but we don't have anything in hand. There are several considerations, and we are weighing each of those out, including cost, time, the ability to construct the school as it's intended. As we have more information to share, we will absolutely share more information. Another question that we've been asked about is, how big is too big? What are we talking about when we're building a new school? And we need to think about, are we talking about building to chase crowding that's on the ground right now? Or are we thinking about chasing crowding that may or may not arrive? Or are we actually saying, we believe that a certain size school is the appropriate size for our students? And let's just pick a high school and say it's 2,500 students. Is that what we say, that we believe that should be the right number of students in a school? And then agree, once we've done that, that should we start getting to 2,501 and 2,502 and 2,503 students, that we start thinking in terms of we're leaving that school either through a new school, a bond adjustment, or a boundary adjustment, or the potential relocation or introduction of new programming in order to get students to move to an attractive magnet. So it's very important for us to think in terms of what is our goal, what do we value, and what sort of experience do we want our students to have in an ideal situation, and plan for the ideal situation, recognizing that circumstances are never quite ideal, but if you don't plan for it, you never get there. And again, I think we want to reiterate that 25 students per classroom is more accurate than 20 students per classroom. And the 100 classrooms, and accounting for 5 years of growth at the high schools that we've planned, all 3 high schools are projected to have a significant number of open seats at the end of our current 5-year planning horizon. So we believe that 100 classrooms with a core capacity of 2,500 students meets our original intention to serve 2,500 students and does it responsibly. So the decisions that we're going to be making, including the land in the future and about the number of classrooms at the high school, will directly impact the delivery of the bond program, but they will also be filtered through the CNA and the capital investment plan as we move forward through the long-range facility master planning process. As we affirm a particular classroom count or desired student body size, those things will be placed into the plan, and we will incorporate those as we start looking forward and looking at how many schools we will need to plan and build. So again, we have questions. We've got to answer them together. And the way that those are going to be answered are going to also have potential financial implications. So here we're getting a little more real about the numbers. And real is real to date. I don't have a crystal ball, and if I did, I'd probably be on an island somewhere. So what we know for fact is that the bond wasn't a $922 million bond. It was an $826 million bond, unescalated. If Mecklenburg County had been able to write us a check for $826 million, and we could have designed, bid, and build all those jobs in a year, it would have cost the taxpayers $826 million. That's not the way the world works. So an escalation factor is applied, and the escalation factor that was applied, and I think recently confirmed in a couple of news articles, was around 11%, getting us to that $922 million number. Well, we've seen a number to date of roughly 20%, so a delta of 9% over that 11% averaged across the program. I don't know what it will look like in the future, but if it continues on the trend line that we've been on, you can see that that number only gets higher by the end of the bond program delivery date. Is that number $90 million? No, I don't think so, but it's a number, and it's something that we're going to have to address as a community, because this is something that has happened to this market through no fault of anyone, either at CMS or Mecklenburg County. It's just the fact of the cost of delivering this type of construction in the market in which we're living today. So as we start making these decisions together, having these conversations together, we will get to these answers together. So you see ahead of you a timeline for some meetings where we've already got scheduled meetings with some established groups such as MEAC and the Equity Committee, and we're putting together an internal work group to help us with the long-range facilities master plan. We have town halls scheduled, and again, all of these slides will be posted, so you'll be able to get this information in March at Northwest School of the Arts, Providence High School, East Meck High School, and at Mauer Creek High School, so we can share this information and a little bit more about the rationale relative to the high schools. And then we will be making decisions as soon as tonight, and as we have more decisions to make, we'll be bringing them forward. If anybody would like to speak with me, invite me to a group, yell at me. Here is my email address, and I'm happy to respond to emails, and we will get back to you as quickly as we can. And so, not tonight, but we are going to, as we take this through the community, ask about the key considerations for the work and seek feedback and bring that to the board for consideration. But tonight, we are going to make a recommendation and ask that the board accept that we do go forward with the new and replacement high schools in the 2017 bond and future with 100 classrooms and a 2,500 student capacity.
So before we get to that, let's just ask all of our questions. There's a lot of information that you just went through. So I will open the floor for questions. And Dr. Jones, I see your hand.
Okay, thank you. I don't know where to begin, but I want to speak to integrity and some of the comments that I heard. Building for the future. West Charlotte and the new Palisades and this whole notion of 100 classroom capacity, 2,500 students. Where did we get it? For an urban district such as Charlotte that is growing, I don't think that's realistic. I think I don't know where we got it. It seems to be concocted based on what? I went online, spent quite a bit of time looking at urban districts, and there was no magic around 2,500. And certainly we sold the okie-doke to the citizens of West Charlotte and Palisades with 125 schools. Again, speak to the integrity of what we say we are going to do. Now, let me hearken back to the new Newell 5 years ago. That school was built needing trailers because you used a 5-year projection, and really, I wonder if you used a 5-year projection because I live in that area. It built up. Now we have in the hopper 5 years later for a relief for Hidden Valley and Newell and Greer. West Charlotte, look at Bronze. Bronze, that whole area is just bursting at the seams with young families. That whole corridor, 10 years hence, those students, their trajectory will be where? West Charlotte. So you say we're building for the future? Where did the 2,500 high school capacity come from? To me, it does not make sense. I've been in the school business a long time, and I've continued to read and research. How did you make that decision? How did you come upon it? And now we want to talk about being open and transparent with our public. Ha ha. Look there. You haven't been. You promised one thing and now you think you're going to go back on it. I think it is an abomination. Do what we say we are going to do. Look at Palisades. Palisades is growing leaps and bounds. So we're going to build and then we're going to pull some trailers in there? I'm not buying anything that I've heard tonight. Total trust is what the voters gave CMS to build schools. And I'm just saying, we got out there and we promoted that way. Black people helped bring that bond home. And now you're gonna try to sell us the okie-doke. I don't get it. West Charlotte, I'm old school. I know what West Charlotte was. The reason West Charlotte doesn't have the students in that school is because we lost a commitment to make West Charlotte a school of excellence. We continue to think in a box about innovative models of learning and teaching. Our only mindset for West Charlotte has and continues to be a deficit puny one. So a whole lot of things go into building a school, as you indicated. I mean, I heard a lot here, opportunities to educate. West Charlotte has not had the building to do that. West Charlotte has not had the programming to draw people in, to be magnetic, to be invitational. Mediocrity, you sold 125 classrooms and now a 20% reduction? Based on what? 5-year plan. So 5 years from now, when you see 10 years from now, what are you gonna do? You're gonna drag some trailers in when that whole bursting community needs it. Is that what we're gonna do? I'm just asking the question. We built the new Newell again on old, uninformed paradigms. I mean, I was new to the board. I said, why did you build it? Well, we've just always built that and we think in that box. Well, get out of the darn box.
So, Dr. Jones, is there a specific question?
Yes, the question is, how did you come up on 25 and why did you reduce to 100? 2,500 students as a max for schools. That's not realistic. And how did you come upon changing 125 classrooms to 100 classrooms? I heard the spiel you made, but are we considering growth? No. 5 years from now, you say you don't project that we'll have, but 10 years. Look. Tell me how you look at the children, students who will feed into West Charlotte based on all that building that is going on. And the same with Palisades. So answer that for me, please.
So Dr. Jones, I'm happy to speak to where the 2,500 number came from. So at the in 2016, when the bond was conceived of, and I certainly was not in this role at that time, but I do know that our planning capacity calculation was based on 20 students per classroom. And so when we multiply 125 classrooms times 20 students, that is where the 2,500 capacity comes from. When we look now at looking at 25 students per classroom, because based on the allotment ratio for students to teachers, we know that that's a more accurate depiction of how high schools are used. When we look at 25 students per classroom, we can achieve that same 2,500 student planning capacity with just 100 classrooms, so 100 times 25, instead of 125 times 20. Both equal a planning capacity of 2,500.
So my question then, when we exceed that, are we going to build a new high school when we say land is scarce and we don't have it, particularly we don't have land space?
And Dr. Jones, I would submit that's actually a great question, and it's part of this work. We've got to decide as a community what sort of experience we want students to have, including at the high school, and is 3,000 students an okay number, or is it not okay? Are there implications for things like extracurricular activities and participation in sports that are ruled out because the school is so large? So there's access denied to certain students and children because they just can't make the team because the talent pool is so big and so deep. Do we want kids to eat lunch 4, 5, 6 times a day, or do we want to serve 3 times and deal with it appropriately? So all of those things are absolutely value judgments about how we want to build and how many students we want to accommodate.
Thinking in a box. Take that lunchroom deal. Visited a school in Memphis, Tennessee. How they built that lunchroom and those students flowed through there. Don't tell me. Look at modernizing the way we do things. That cafeteria had stations, students flowed through there, and it wasn't in it 3 periods or even 2 periods.
And those are some of the considerations
Yes.
that we will need to take going forward.
That's right. Just
Absolutely.
think out of the box.
And Dr. Jones, relative to your question for growth, 5-year projected growth for the current West Charlotte attendance area is 313 students. We are working with cooperative strategies to look at 10-year projected growth, but what I can tell you is that with the 5-year projected growth of 313 students, at 100 classrooms, West Charlotte would have over 800 available open seats. And so that would mean in the next 5 years, after 2025, they could more than double their projected growth, in fact, 2.5 times their 5-year projected growth, and we would not need to place mobiles at the school.
And I'll add, Dr. Jones, too, I think your questions are on point. And I suppose I'm showing my age here, but I was around the table in 2015 when we did, and you probably got sick of hearing us and seeing us, quarterly updates, and I have one here. Actually, I have 2 here. And one of the things that we discovered as we were going through in the planning process on this, and you may remember, at the time, the largest growth was occurring in our high schools. It wasn't in our elementaries, and it really wasn't in our middle schools. As a matter of fact, our middle schools, we were declining. So our superintendent at the time, we got around the table and we had conversations and considerations of what do we do with this on our next bond campaign, and what do we build in? If you remember, we did have 100 classroom standard, use that word loosely, for our high schools. And at the time, as Ms. Craven-Howell said earlier, we were calculating that with 20, on average, 20 students per. Superintendent Clark decided that we needed to increase that. So we increased it by the number of classrooms for a total planning capacity again, and I want to just reiterate a number of times that it's been said, for 2,500 students planning capacity. What's important, and one point that I want us to remember here tonight, the high schools that are in design right now for West Charlotte, Olympic, and I'll just call those 2 because that's 2 that we're talking about right now, they're designed with larger core capacities to accommodate those 2,500 students. It's not the 2,000 that we used to have in the schools. Now, how much bigger is that? I can't calculate that for you now, but we have incorporated extra space, particularly in our cafeterias, in our media centers, on the school campus, in our parking lots, to accommodate that 2,500 planning capacity. I know it may seem like that we're just switching numbers, but we are not. We're facing the reality of today to be a little more relative about how many students we really are serving in the classrooms, and it's not 20. It's probably higher than 25 sometimes. It's lower than 25 sometimes, but we have to run on a number. We have to use something, and the average is supported evidence at the state and the local level. So I don't know whether that exactly answers your question, Dr. Jones, but hopefully it will give context to where did that come from.
Any other questions? Gabe, you have a question?
Yeah.
I think you just turned yours.
As a student, I can tell you that utilization and overcrowding is not simply a problem when it comes to the fact of how many students are assigned to a school, but it's also a problem of how crowded and overutilized classrooms specifically are. So it's a problem at the point where students are competing within classrooms for textbooks, where teachers have to prioritize some students' attention over others because there are too many people in that classroom in the first place. It's especially a problem when the communities that have historically been denied equitable access to resources are now forced to lose some of that access to individualized education. So the justification that we're deciding to change from a 1 to 20 to 1 to 25 or 1 to 25.5 being labeled as generous and generally being labeled as positive and as a good thing to justify taking away classrooms doesn't seem to me to actually benefit the real problems we're having with overcrowding. So I want to know, how did we come up with this change of 1 to 24.5 and 1 to 25.5?
It's what's in our schools.
That's an ADM statement.
It's not that I appreciate your feedback, particularly as a high school student who is experiencing classrooms day in and day out. It's not that we have come up with the change. We are assigning a number that is a more accurate reflection of what happens in high schools. And so the 24.5 and the 26.5 numbers that I shared are the way that teaching positions are allotted to schools. One of the ways that we look at utilization in schools is the ratio of teachers to classrooms. So does every teacher assigned to work in a building have a classroom in which to teach? And so we look at the ratio of teachers to classrooms. And so when we look at 25 students at high schools, that gives us a more accurate depiction of the number of students, not just students, but also the number of teachers that would be assigned to that classroom. My guess is you're pretty hard-pressed in your day-to-day experience to find a high school class of 20 students or fewer. That's not a very specialized class. My guess is most classes in your school contain way more than 25 students. So what we're trying to do is assign a number to our planning capacity calculation that is a more accurate depiction of how we use our resource of high schools today.
So wouldn't 125 classrooms more accurately solve for that problem, though?
No. So what we're solving for is planning capacity. How many students can we accommodate in a building? When we calculated that capacity in 2016, we were using 20 students per classroom. So that calculation then was 125 times 20, and that's 2,500. When we began to look at a more accurate depiction of students per classroom at 25, we can achieve that same 2,500 student planning capacity with 100 classrooms, so 100 times 25. Much of what you are getting at are programmatic decisions. And so those are decisions that we have to help principals to make and how they schedule students based on their academic needs. And we absolutely accommodate for those needs. And so we look at the fact that our self-contained classrooms, for example, will have far fewer than 25 students. And so that is why we say, on average, 25 students per classroom in a high school. We haven't even talked about elementary and middle school, which is a whole different number altogether because teachers are allotted differently at different grade levels. And so for us to have applied 20 students per grade level was just simply inaccurate.
That's right.
Ms. Marshall.
Let's go this slide. I'm glad you've got it up because I feel like we just need to walk through a little bit of the numbers here, and I have some questions as we do that because this informs our thinking. We have to be realistic as far as what we already have and what we and the growth and what we're looking to build. So with the West Charlotte 96 number, does that include mobiles that are at that school, or can you give me some information currently on that first column?
Yes, that's an excellent question. So this first column is the number of classrooms either in or planned for each of these schools. We do not count mobiles when we calculate planning capacity or when we talk about classroom utilization. Because that's based on an assumption and previous acknowledgement that we do not consider mobile units permanent capacity. And so we want to tell the story of how the core space is being utilized. So West Charlotte today has 96 classrooms in their core facility. Would you like me to walk through the other columns?
I would. I think that would be helpful.
That 96 classrooms translates to a planning capacity of 2,400 students. So that it's 96 times 25 is 2,400 students. 20th day enrollment this year at West Charlotte was just under 1,400 students. The number you see below is the homeschool enrollment. West Charlotte has a high school international baccalaureate program, and there are just over 300 students who are enrolled in the school as part of the magnet program. This is not a relief school, so we're not projecting enrollment to go down necessarily. Over 5 years, the projected growth is 313 students. That would mean if we added that to today's enrollment, we're looking at just under 1,700 students enrolled, and just under 1,400 of those would be from the homeschool attendance area, because we still have and intend to continue to have the IB program there. That would mean if we built a school of 125 classrooms, in 5 years, we would expect to have over 1,400 empty seats in that school. If we built the school at 100 classrooms, we would expect to have just over 800 empty seats in 5 years.
So we've obviously got room for additional growth. We've obviously got room for additional programming and students that may come there for any other changes. I just did calculate too, and I'm gonna do this as we walk through everybody, because I think that's the fair thing. Currently, with that 2019, 2020, 20th day enrollment, we have 14 students per class at West Charlotte. And if the 313 enrollment holds true, we build it at 100, we would have 17 students per classroom, which is definitely, we've got some room to go with those 811 seats. So I do want to look at that, and I feel like that's something we've got to be aware of as we go forward. Can we go now to Olympic and look at that same sort of thing?
Yep, so this is, the Olympic analysis is slightly different because we are building a relief school. So we're looking at that enrollment and now splitting the enrollment of one school over multiple schools. And so it's the next two rows. Olympic High School currently has 107 classrooms, which at 25 students per classroom is capacity for 2,675 students. The school's 20th day enrollment was just over 2,500 students. We project, however, if the relief school was to open today, the enrollment at Olympic would reduce to just under 1,500 students, because a number of those students would go to the Olympic Relief School. Now, you can quickly add those two numbers and say, well, that adds up to more than 2,500. We are assuming that there are a group of students currently outside of the Olympic attendance area who will go to one of these two schools. Namely, our students at Nations Ford that continue to Southwest Middle and currently go all the way up to Harding. It was always the desire to have them assigned to a high school closer to home. And so those numbers are projected here. When we look at growth, in the Olympic attendance area, we expect growth of about 700 over 5 years. In the relief area, about 250. You see here then what the projected enrollment would be in 5 years. That would mean in 2024, we would expect just under 500 extra seats at Olympic. For the relief school, if we built it at 125 classrooms, we expect just over 1,400 extra seats. Built at 100 classrooms, we expect just under 800 extra seats. We do a similar analysis for South Charlotte Relief. This one looks a little different. I'm not able to be as precise because the exact location of the South Charlotte High School is not known. So instead, I've aggregated all of our South Charlotte high schools.
Can you tell me which schools you're including?
I've included here Ardrey-Kell, Providence, South Meck, and Myers Park. Across those 4 schools, there are a total of 449 classrooms in the core space, which is capacity for 11,225 students. 20th day enrollment for this school year is just under 12,200, clearly pointing out the need for relief in South Charlotte. I do want to point out that of those 4 high schools, South-Mecklenburg High School does have a magnet program that is the World Language Magnet, and there are just over 700 students enrolled. If the relief school were open today, we project that we would assign around 1,600 students to that school, which would drop enrollment at the aggregate of these 4 schools to 10,604, just under 9,900 if we exclude the magnet. When we look at projected growth around those 4 high schools, or around the South Charlotte area rather, if we add that up, it's about 1,200 students. In the aggregate high schools, we would be short 532 seats. However, if you come down to the relief school, At 125 classrooms, we'd have over 1,500 extra seats, and at 100 classrooms, we'd have close to 900 extra seats. Once we know where this high school is going to be built, I can get more precise in terms of the distribution of seats, but in aggregate, we have sufficient seats to accommodate growth in the South Charlotte area.
I don't know if Ms. Shipp or Ms. Sawyer had the hand up first.
Just relevant to this, aren't we adding capacity with the Waddell campus as well, and how does that add seats to
So
this?
Waddell is also located in the south, southwest, and it has 71 classrooms. The bond calls for us to reopen that school as a magnet. Based on this analysis, it does not need to be a magnet with homeschool seats. But certainly it would draw from, at a minimum, the blue transportation zone, which would mean it would be students coming out of these schools.
So its total built capacity is what?
71 times 25. 1775.
So we're looking at several thousand, if you aggregate all
Roughly another
the
1,800.
additional high school seats that we have room to grow into in the coming years and decades. I know it's more than I had expected once I saw it all added up. Ms. Shipp?
Right, I kind of was going to ask that question too. I live in the southwest area, and I'm also an alumni of West Charlotte. So my biggest concern is delay in getting these schools open, because the most important thing is that we open these schools. We got overcrowding. We got substandard buildings. We need to get these schools open. So my question is, we're going between 100 to 125. What delays will we see as we continue to talk about whether it's 25 less or 125? We need to get these schools built. So how does this affect planning if we are trying to say, I believe right now you've been looking at the study for 100, and you've been projecting that and starting your plans with 100. I went to the CTE fair. I saw, that's Career Technical Education Fair. I saw the project for West Charlotte. It's beautiful, and they talked about 100 already, that we would have curriculum programs, we would have extra, we can dream about what we want to put in that school at 100. So what I'm saying is, are we going to be able to get these schools open and open on time if we're still trying to decide between 100 and 125?
So, Ms. Shipp, I'll take that one. If we remain steady the course and we continue as designed right now for 100 classrooms, again, with a planning capacity of 2,500, then we will stay on schedule, and both of the high schools will be opened August of 2022. There is a high chance that if we change course right now and go to the 125 classrooms, we will have some redesign that is necessary and required. It will delay the project. I'm not certain how long the project will be delayed, but there will be a delay, and I'll also just mention that there will be an increased cost in the overall project for the increase of classrooms.
And also an increased cost relative to the escalation, because with adding that year, we're adding additional inflationary pressures on that project. And so it will also help drive some of our conversations with our funding partners at the county around the amount of funding that we would need to deliver all of these projects, and making sure that the money was available at the time that we needed to draw those funds down.
So Ms. Cheek and then Mr. Strain.
I have quite a list, so I'm going to start with the first. Are there any other local governmental entities that are experiencing 20% cost overruns or cost escalations? Or are they seeing more or less than that?
So without blaming or naming anybody, right, absolutely. Those overruns are being seen in the public sector, they're being seen in the private sector. There's projects that everybody knows that are very large and get a lot of attention here that have seen pretty significant overruns in the order of magnitude of 15 to as much as 20% over the same period.
Thank you. As one person in this room that served on both the Superintendent Standards Review Committee and also the School Building Solutions Committee in 2005, I know the amount of work that was undertaken by citizen groups back in that time to try to figure out the right way to build schools. Back in that day, we were looking at things like giant libraries were built in schools, and we foresaw, thank goodness, in '05, the need to scale down the size of media centers to accommodate the growing, we saw a trend coming in technology and online and that. So we did look at some things back then, and we made some improvements. That was 15 years ago. It was a lifetime ago for me. And I can't imagine that we don't need to really dive into all those things now because of the changes that have been taken. So just a few little things. The Harding High School. I celebrated with them when they won their football state championship, and I know that a concern was the locker rooms. Is anything going to be happening to improve the locker room situation for them with the new gym?
Well, they will have a full new gym, and they will have locker rooms.
Okay,
Is that the question? Yes.
That was the question. All right. So, and then I saw several gym projects in there for a lot of the MECs. I call them the MECs, the old East MEC, North MEC, South MEC, all those. Harding was getting a new gym so that they can use their old gym as an auxiliary. I think West MEC. Which schools? I know North MEC still only has one gym.
Correct.
It's the size of my living room. If you dribble out of bounds, you go out the door, which is bad. So are there any other high schools with just one gym?
There are. Let me get that list to you,
That would be
though. I
great.
wouldn't be able to list those here, but I can certainly get that to you.
Because I would like to know where we still are not really being equitable to our schools. That's a good question. Gosh, I have so many. The concept of is a trailer mean a school's overcrowded goes to this whole notion of the core capacity of a building versus an operational decision to add a lot more teachers to take down the student ratios, especially in the younger grades with weighted student staffing. Akeisha, do you know, I know the Newell came up as, did we build a school too small? Is Newell kind of our old standard 39 classroom building?
Yes, it is.
So that, we used to say that had a core capacity of about the bathrooms, cafeteria and all that was built for 780 kids. How many kids are at Newell?
Enrollment is 770. It was their 20th day.
So, but we've got extra teachers there, maybe, is that a weighted student staffing situation?
I would imagine that it is. I showed them with 45 teachers in 39 classrooms, so they're at 115%.
So their core capacity utilization is good, but we're giving them extra teachers to meet the needs of the students and making a programming and operational decision, which is then necessitating us to bring in extra classrooms as mobiles. Not the best idea, but the school core capacity is good. So just so we see that a lot, mostly in elementary schools, is that correct?
That's part of it. I mean, and what I hear you speaking to is, and we talked about this a little bit in response to the Municipal Concerns Act, that when we're looking at utilization, we should look at all three of those measures to get the full story of any given school.
Yeah, because I've got some schools with 39 classrooms and 1,100 kids. And that's a lot different. We get to the 100 classrooms. I'm a 100 classroom high school mom. I've got a student at Huff. I've lived it. I had a student at North MEC High School, which is a 60-year-old building with 19 buildings on campus, 3,200 students when she entered her freshman year there. She graduated in 2010. I've been around a long time. I have kids that are 10 years apart, so I've experienced a lot. At 3,200 kids, which is what a 125 classroom school would hold, it was a nightmare. There was not enough parking. The competition to go out for football, for every sport, was insane. They couldn't get all the kids in auditorium for even freshman orientation because the auditorium wasn't large enough. It was just awful. It was North MEC at that time was the largest high school in the state of North Carolina, and it was an honor that none of us wanted. Move ahead 10 years, my son is a senior at Huff. There's about 27 or 2,800 kids there, 2,700-ish.
I looked that up earlier. Their 20th day enrollment was 2,493.
Okay, perfect. 2,500, almost 2,500. So they're almost kind of the ideal. So they basically have 100 classrooms, 2,500, basically 2,500 kids. He does have several classrooms, Gabe, I know you experience it too, that have 30 kids, 30 plus kids in it. I know everybody that's in PE has 50 kids in their classrooms. I know band has as many kids as they can get in the doors because they want as many kids to come out as possible. So those do balance out with like French 5 AP that maybe only has 11. But so the experience of high school that he's experienced in this 100 classroom building with 2,500 kids, kind of the ideal, is a completely different thing. And I'm speaking anecdotally as a parent. The hallways are easy to maneuver. The building is well laid out so that the wings are all separated with the core space. The cafeteria has great flow. As you said, Dr. Jones, it's not excessively overcrowded. They do have stations set up. The gym can be accessed and the auditorium from the outside, so community groups can use it all weekend. It's just a great flow, and it's completely different than going to North Mac. So I do support 100 classrooms because I see how good it works, and I've talked to the principals that have run these 3,000 plus schools, and they tell me it's just crazy. In the way dark ages, I went to a high school in suburban Detroit that had 5,000 students. All I remember is just walking around the halls because it was so crowded I couldn't do anything. I felt such a sense of relief when I moved to the south, other than I couldn't speak properly, according to most of my high school friends down here in North Mecklenburg, or South Mecklenburg. But I went to South Meck High School and graduated from there. And it was a completely different, more intimate experience. Even though I still had 500 kids in my class, I didn't have 1,200 kids in my class. So I definitely do like the 2,500 as a new baseline for us to look at. So where are all my questions here? Trailers equal overcrowding. Historically, so we used to build 39 classroom elementaries, now we're doing 45.
Correct.
Middle schools, is that stayed about the same? Are we still recommending that to
Traditional
stay
middle
the same?
still stay the same right now.
And how many kids?
54.
54 classrooms, so about 1,100? 1,080, okay. So those numbers we think are still staying the same. So we really never changed our elementary or middle, but in the bond, we just changed the high school number.
We changed the elementary in the bond.
Oh,
from
that's a
39 to
45.
45.
And
And
the
just-
K8.
Pardon?
And the K-8.
And the K-8s, well, the K-8s didn't exist when we designed things in '05.
And that's because of K-2.
That wasn't thing. So I will support the change to 100 because I've seen it work. I think that it is, when we're looking at things through the lens of equity, which we must do, we would be delivering the same school that we have in Mallard Creek and at Huff and at Rocky River and down in the Palisades and at West Charlotte. It would be a very similar school. Back in the day, we actually built a few of our schools around here. I think, Carol, Waddell was built at the same time as Hopewell and Vance and maybe Butler?
Yes.
Yes.
Was that the same
Yes.
plan? Okay. And those had how many classrooms?
Those were originally 71
Okay.
to 3, and then we did do additions to
I
bring
think,
those to
yeah,
the 100.
Did they realize that was a little small, so they added some classrooms?
It was part of earlier equity work and working through the baseline standards work that we did in 2005, 2006. All of those high schools delivered prior to the Standards Review Committee work. So as we looked at that, we said we need to create a new baseline. And I'm the other person in this room that I know for certain was on that committee. So
On that committee,
right,
yeah.
and so we did look at that as one of the reasons to adopt the 100 going forward. And then I think to what Ms. Stamper said, the 100 was around a 2,000 student reality, but what we know is that the core gets taxed at that number. So being able to provide an environment for the 2,500 students, which we think is about the right number of kids for a high school, for a principal to manage, for the kids to have the opportunity and the access, then you design the core for that number as one of the factors, and then you translate that into a number of students, because I wish the state allotted us teachers based on empty classrooms. We would have a totally different bond program. We would just be building schools. So that's not the way it works. It's all allotted according to the number of students in a school, and that's why it's got to be averaged.
So one more question, comment. So my favorite movie is Field of Dreams, and the theory of Field of Dreams, if any of you have not watched the movie, the main line is, if you build it, they will come. They will eventually come, but based on what Ms. Craven-Howell has showed us, we still will have a very large bit of capacity in 5 years. And if we stay at the same trajectory, we would still probably not have overcrowding at 10, potentially.
It would take significant, almost doubling, in some cases
some
tripling,
cases.
the projected growth for us to use all those seats.
I think Field of Dreams is great for a movie in a cornfield in Iowa. They're actually going to play a baseball game out there, I think, this year. But unfortunately, I have to answer to taxpayers, and I have to pay taxes, and we have to be very prudent with our tax dollars. We have to build it where they are now and where we see them coming, and we have to build it the right size in the right place. I also do not support use of the old Providence site. I'm going to put that on record. I do not support use of the old Providence site for high school. I went to South Meck High School and lived in the middle of Old Providence when I was a wee young pup 40 years ago, and I just don't think that that should be. But I will support the 100 because I do think that that is the best thinking that we have at this time. And that's all. That was a lot.
So, Mr. Strain, I saw your hand. Ms. Byers-Bailey, I saw your hand next.
Hey, Dennis.
Mr. Strain.
I appreciate you coming back, helping us out.
Thank you.
Do you know which high schools have received additional bump outs in terms of the original construction was done and then there are later phases of additions?
Absolutely. We can give you an exhaustive list, but all of the multi-building campuses, because those were created in a totally different date. I mean, going back to, I think, what Dr. Jones was getting at and thinking outside the box, South-Mecklenburg High School was built at a time where the kids went home for lunch. And so the cafeteria was about the size of this room. And then when you have 3,000 students trying to access that lunchroom, guess what? We need to build a new cafeteria to accommodate that core. So there has been a history of those things, more specifically with those multi-building campuses. But again, when we did recognize that we needed to add at Hopewell and Butler and come up with a new baseline standard of the 100, those additions were undertaken as well.
So when Hopewell, Butler, I'm aware of Myers Park and South Meck receiving additional classrooms as well, right? So
North Meck, West Meck,
East Meck, West Meck.
Harding.
loads of them, right?
Yep.
So when you mentioned South Meck and that South Meck got a new cafeteria and lunchroom in order to accommodate changes in how we go about operating.
Right.
Butler, for example, one of the schools around the corner from me, when we added classrooms there, did we change the size of the lunchroom?
We actually did not.
Okay. So that's why Butler sits currently at, depending upon which metric, we've talked about 3 different metrics, 110, 102, or 132% utilization, right? Myers Park, on the other hand, also has had at least 3 phases, has 140 classrooms, and Myers Park either sits at 119, 127, or 187% utilization. That 187 is indeed the core space that we've been talking about.
Right.
Right? And so we've said that, a better planning figure would be 25. When we change the planning figure for a classroom from 20 to 25, did we change the size of the lunchroom accordingly as well?
We did in these projects specific to the 2017 bond, and then we have corrected those issues where we can in those, especially in those older multi-building campuses like a Myers Park. And again, the goal for Myers Park is not for it to have 140 classrooms and 5,000 students. That's not what we want there. We have to, in order to do the phases of work, you have 2 options. You leave the kids in the buildings that are there today that you plan to take down and let that be the case until the new buildings are erected and you do the demolition, or you demolish the buildings you really don't want on the campus anymore, and then you bring in mobiles while we're having other conversations, quite honestly, about things like boundaries, because the buildings don't move, right?
Yep.
But the boundaries can.
So if we take Myers Park, for example, we've got 140 classrooms, right? We may say we didn't intend to have 140 classrooms, but we do have 140 classrooms.
Absolutely.
Mobiles, with mobiles.
No, that's not with mobile.
No,
Just classrooms.
that's just classrooms.
Right.
So if that's where we ended up, why did we end up there? Because we didn't build other high schools. And so now we're building a high school. The community has agreed to build a high school, fund a high school. And there were several schools that it was targeting. The one that is the most overcrowded high school in the district, in fact, most overcrowded school in the district, is where Gabe goes to school. And so the plan to build relief for the south part of our county, where there's a tremendous amount of growth going, if we're going to look at that, knowing full well that our track record in high-growth areas is putting additions on, whether it's in South Mac or East Mac or all the Macs, right? In high-growth areas, why wouldn't we go ahead and build the capacity now that we plan to build when we committed to the community to build a 125 classroom high school?
So what I would share, and totally fair, what I would share is that when we're doing those additions, like on those multi-campus buildings, it's not to add permanent capacity. It's because there are some horrible buildings in some of these. I mean, some of the buildings that we took down on South Mac, kids that went through there needed to go away years ago. And so we had to build new space in order to take the old space down. So as you're working through phases of project, and again, being equitable and making sure that we're touching every school that needs to be touched appropriately at the time that the renovations are needed, it speaks to sometimes you leave a little bit more there. It's not that we're building for that desired state, as I put it earlier. We're not just saying, because just as a framing device, we could just say, well, we don't really need to build any more new schools anywhere else. We can just keep adding on, and it's okay if an elementary school has 3,000 kids. Maybe we're okay with that. So some of this is a value judgment that we kind of have to make as a community, and that the board has to help set, because this is the capital program is something the board owns. So we have to decide then, are we going to just say, every time a new building goes up in Ballantyne, we're going to add a building at Ardrey-Kell, or are we going to say, you know what, we really are going to stand fast on what's best for kids is 2,500 students. We have a core that supports that, and so we either need to adjust a boundary, or we need to build a new school, or we need to create a program in order to bleed kids off of that school site and onto another one to get that relief.
Understood. So if we build a 100 classroom high school and it's at capacity when we open it, where does the next one go? If we can't figure out where this one goes, where does the next one go?
And that's also a fair question, and that's, I would submit, also part of this work, because we've got to think differently about our schools and what we build and where we deliver them and how we deliver them going forward, because of scarcity of real estate, because of relative cost of construction, because things are getting taller. They just are. Drive down every street in Charlotte and things are getting taller. That's the way our world is going to be for the foreseeable future. So we need to adapt to that as well, and we can't do that tonight, and we wouldn't do that tonight, because that is not fair to our public, and that's why we're going through this long process and having these conversations, even the very difficult ones, and trying to understand what it is that the community values and where we want to be for our kids.
And because we can't possibly answer the question I've just asked, we can't even ask the question that was approved by the voters in November of 2017 as to where the relief for the highest utilization school in our district goes right now, which is now committed for the last project of this bond, I think, in 2024, 7 years after the voters voted for it. Again, the highest utilization school and the relief for it. Then my question becomes, when would the next one take place? Even if we could, when would the next relief come? And I look at that and I think, well, if it's the last one on this bond, it's probably the last one on the next bond, even if we could get there. So the next relief would come in 2030. And so we don't have any 2030 numbers in terms of forecasted growth. Charlotte and many of the municipalities are planning for 2040. And so we've had some conversations about what our numbers look like in 2040. So we actually start planning and executing the program that you rightly call for in terms of how we go about supporting this.
Absolutely.
All of that being said, I'm certainly inclined to say, if we're going to go and build capacity, knowing full well that we are struggling mightily to figure out where to place the relief for the highest utilization school in our district, and there, Lord knows where another one's going to come, I'm going to put as much capacity in as I can. And that capacity is going to support the same number of students that we have in 3 of our schools today that are thriving. And so from that perspective, I'll be supportive of 125 classrooms, which is what we committed to the community. And what we have in a number of scenarios with 3125 students or more, close to 34 and 3,500, schools that are thriving. So I do have a couple more questions as long as I still have the floor. Of the 29 projects in the $922 million bond, can anybody tell me how many of those projects were projected to require additional land being acquired? So a number of those projects, we already had land. So for example, West Charlotte, we knew that the plan going in was to build that high school, because I wasn't on the board then, but I know there were some discussions, I recall discussions, well, we could potentially move it or build it on the same site. So the assumption going in was that we would build it on the same site, and that's the way it was budgeted. Palisades, we had the land. The assumption was we would not need to acquire land, and so there is not money budgeted to acquire land. There's money budgeted, of course, for site preparation, right?
Right.
So of the 29 projects, how many of those projects were projected to require land acquisition?
Mr. Strain, there were 6 that were originally identified as the possibility of needing land until we did the site work and actually geographically looked to see what was available, but we put them in for the potential of having to need land.
Okay.
2 of them, we've already purchased land.
Two we have.
2 we have.
Yep.
Though, and just to refresh, those are for the elementary relief for Elon, Hawkridge, and Polo, which is the Ardrey site that we recently purchased. The other is the Sandy Porter land that we purchased for the Nations Ford, Sterling, Still Creek relief. We were able to, we didn't know whether we were going to be able to, but we were able to build Briarwood on site. We didn't know whether we were going to need to have additional land for that. Same with Shamrock Gardens. The other was, of course, the Relief High School for South Charlotte. Still looking for that parcel of land or alternatives to build. And then the other is the elementary relief for Windsor, Winterfield, and Idlewild. And we are still looking at alternative sites for that one.
So of those 6 projects, I think that you said Briarwood and Shamrock were thought at one point that we would we may possibly need to buy land. Obviously, the South County Elementary Relief and Sandy Porter, or the land on Sandy Porter Road, we've bought those. How much was budgeted for those 2 versus what was paid for the land?
There was, yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
that's okay. For the elementary schools, there was $2 million that was advanced for that land from the county for each of the elementaries, and there's 12.5 for the new high school, South Charlotte.
I'm sorry, the advance is the advance, but in the budget, in the $922 million, which was an $826 million package taking of net present value, and then the future value of that came to $922 million. What was budgeted for those 6 projects?
I'm going to ask Don Cave, who is over our capital program management services, to step to the podium.
Thank you.
And so what Don shared with me is it's
Or
part,
maybe not.
right, yeah, we got trying to get the information as quickly as we can. So it's part of the overall project budget. So there's a project budget, and within that number is the land and the construction cost for the building.
So you got land acquisition, site preparation,
Design.
and construction costs.
All your hard and soft costs are baked into the project number. Yes, sir.
Right. So for the high school projects, there's 3 high school projects. If I look at the land acquisition cost, the site preparation cost, and the construction cost, how much was for land acquisition and site preparation for those 3 projects? So each one was budgeted $110 million. And so if you look at it, you've got 2 that don't require land, 1 that very likely will require land. And then you've got site preparation, demolition, et cetera, on all 3 projects. And then you've got the construction cost.
Right.
So how do those break down in terms of those 3 projects?
So it doesn't parse quite that cleanly because, for example, the horizontals, the utilities, all the site work is kind of a part of your construction cost. So it's hard to really scissor that out until you have all the bids in hand and know exactly, okay, we paid this much for paving and we paid this much for grading, and so the whole budget number is basically what you're working with to accomplish all of those goals until such time as you have bids, and then it's really real, and then you can say, okay, this is what we're allocating to each one of those things, but it's working within a budget number to accomplish everything that you've just identified.
Right, but you've got you're gonna build 3 high schools.
Right.
The construction costs, regardless of their 100 or 125 classrooms, those aren't gonna be the same cost because they're 3 different projects, but the construction cost is gonna be something in the range, right? I mean, they're not gonna be a million miles off those 3 projects. One of those projects requires a very substantial purchase of land. And I can certainly understand how that's buried in the $330 million. How much money was budgeted to buy land in the south part of the county for the South County High School that needs to provide relief to Ardrey Kell?
So I believe that was the 6 million in each project.
$6 million to buy, and do site preparation.
That was the 12 million that was referenced.
That would be 18 across 3, but so you've got $6 million.
One of them we already had. We had the site at Palisades.
Yeah. So that you've got 6. You've got 6 in demolition and site preparation, et cetera, at West Charlotte. You've got 6 in the Palisades. You've got 6 in whatever property you end up buying in South Charlotte. I seem to be missing the budget to acquire acquire land in South Charlotte. There's no money there, right? So we have a substantial issue we talked about cost escalations. Now we're talking about, come up with a number, I don't know, a $35 million hole, right? That we start with before we start the digging that you talked about where we had projected cost escalations and we're seeing substantially more. So we've got it on that project. I don't know if we have it on the others as well. We talked about 2 of these that we had, I guess, budgeted money to buy land. Now what was the money for the South County Elementary relief? To buy the land. What was the money budgeted of the $826 million net present value? How much of that was to acquire land for a South County High School?
$2 million of that was earmarked in the budget.
Okay, and
For the elementary.
we paid substantially more than that, right? And I'm not aware of 10 acres that you can buy in South Charlotte for $2 million. So we've got a gap there, is my point. And we've got to be clear that we've got a gap if we're going to figure out how to work our way out of this, right? So we have a substantial gap not only on cost escalations, but a very substantial gap on land acquisition here. And we need to figure out what that is. Because we need to go to our partners in full transparency as I look at my dear friends on the Board of County Commissioners and say, look, I think we had a miss and we need your help, right? But we can't do that unless we're crystal clear as to what the miss is.
Absolutely, which is one of the reasons we need some of the decisions from the board so that we can help refine that and figure out what that delta is.
Right. So in order to know what that delta is, we obviously need to get to a level of understanding of what that gap is. And so where are we in terms of determining that gap? I just explored one piece of it, and I apologize to everybody for going to that level of detail, but the point is you have to, in order to understand what the gap is.
Absolutely. Right? And you just alluded to the complexity, and that's why we don't have a dollar figure to just put out here tonight.
Well, and I think the challenge is that we've got to be clear that whilst we've got a gap between 922 and some number, even today, we've got at least a couple of figures we've got to come up with and share. In the short term, very immediate term, we have a need and a gap to move these projects forward. In the longer term of the 7-year term of this bond program, we have a more substantial gap that we need to come up with and share with our funding partners to figure out how we go about funding this investment in our children.
And Mr. Strain, that dialogue has begun, so you're exactly on point. Anything else?
No, I'll take a break.
Okay. Ms. Byers-Bailey, and then I see some hands of people that have spoken before, but I also see Ms. Delahara hasn't spoken yet. So let's do Ms. Byers-Bailey, Ms. Delahara, and then we'll start going back around.
Okay, thank you. In your presentation, I saw that we are doing an East Meck High School addition in 2022. And I wondered, what is the classroom capacity at that school now, and what are we taking it to? Or are we replacing what's already there?
The East Mecklenburg High School edition.
I'm sorry, Ms. Bauer, I don't have the number of classrooms, but we'll get that to you. For the
Current number of classrooms.
Oh, the current we do.
Yeah,
But the
current
new
number.
one, let me get that from staff while Akeisha.
Sure, thank you.
The current number of classrooms at East Meck is 117.
How many?
117.
117.
And is this addition replacing something that's already there, or are we adding more classrooms to the 117?
So we're adding more classrooms. We're adding approximately 30 more. But the goal eventually is to take down the building, perhaps, that is being replaced.
But you said take the building down.
So it's not a net addition.
Okay, so we're adding 30, but we're going to take, once the 30 are in, we're going to take down
At some point, we will
some.
take out a classroom building.
But do you
It's a
know?
replacement.
I don't know how many of that is
Don't know.
at this point. We can
Okay.
find that out for you, Ms. Byers-Bailey.
Okay, I'd like to know. Thank you.
And the age of that building that we're taking down would be helpful.
Yeah, I imagine there isn't some age to that. I remember being out there, and it was built about 51 or 54.
They're all 60.
Yeah,
They're almost
they're all
60
older
years
buildings.
old. Close to 60 years old.
Okay. I'm want to talk a little bit about the 2,500 students. That's a number of students in a high school that, well, when I was in high school, I don't even think we had 2,500 students in West Charlotte. But for me and my high school experience, I enjoyed a smaller student population because I got to know my classmates and they got to know me, and we appreciated what the qualities we each had to offer. And I enjoyed it so much that when I got ready to go to college, I picked a smaller college so that I could have that same interactive experience. So, but I think when we talked, when the bond came out initially and we represented to this population, the public, that we were talking about a new high school, or for West Charlotte, a high school replacement, and for Palisades, a new high school, we were always talking about a student population of 2,500.
Correct.
The fact that we were thinking when we started that we needed 125 classes to accommodate 2,500 students was not shared with the public in a timely capacity, that, we don't need 125 classes, we only need 100 for the same size student population. And that is entirely regrettable because it left the community with a sense of not being transparent. But aside from that, West Charlotte, the West Charlotte-Beatties Ford Road corridor is experiencing, and Dr. Jones expressed very eloquently the growth that we are experiencing in our community. You see it at Bruns. You can't even get to the school practically for all the construction that is not only going up, but is going down in the ground. By the time we finish, and Bruns is the last school on the bond package, on the bond as it was shared with the public. But if it comes out of by the time it comes out of the ground, it's going to need every trailer that's already down at the end to accommodate all of the students that are going to be in that school, just looking at the buildings that are coming out of the ground in that area. And that's for the multi-level ones that are coming out. That's not even talking about the homes that are being consumed and rebuilt. When you talk, and I'm talking about Bruns now, because the students that are going to be swamping Bruns when it finally comes out of the ground are going to be headed to West Charlotte.
10 years.
And even though I love the 2,500 student body ideal in terms of the experience, I'm concerned that by the time those students get to West Charlotte, that unless we do some magic with student assignment, that school is going to need additions or trailers. And that bothers me. If we look at Palisades, we don't even have to wait. The construction down there is explosive. And I know that you see it down there because you live down there. And I love the idea of the 2,500 student body. And I'm concerned that if we want to live with that ideal, we're going to have to build a whole lot more schools. And it's not going to be on a onesie, twosie capacity. And I'm not sure how we're going to find the land to accommodate that kind of growth.
Ms. De La Hara, or are you, I'm sorry, are you done?
I'm done.
Okay. Ms. De La Hara?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple quick questions. And actually the first, I'll just make a statement. It seems to me that quite simply a mistake was made when it was projected and using the 20 number instead of the more accurate number that we know is 25. And I'm framing that as a statement because I'm not going to ask a question because I know, Ms. Craven-Hall, you weren't here during that time, but it's just a general statement just to say that we could have saved ourselves a lot of trouble if we would have projected 2,500, and that is 100 classrooms from the get-go, because that is the norm and it's what we had been doing in the previous 3 schools. I appreciate what you had to say, Ms. Cheek, about your son's experience at Huff and how that model has worked really well. And I'm just wondering, has there been other feedback from schools or community members that using the 100 classroom model has been effective? Is that part of your process to get that data?
It absolutely has been to date. We've gotten feedback from the school leadership and SLTs and parents as we've brought new schools online. In fact, I had a conversation once with Miss Penn over there about the floors at Rocky River versus the floors at Huff, and they were the same floors, but we've had those conversations about how things are done, and we do them with equity, and that everybody has experienced, has given us positive feedback based on their experience in those schools. So we do have that. And all of that was done, again, going back to 2005, 2006, where we did have educators and we had people from the elementary, the middle, and the high school. We had area superintendents. We had representation from the construction industry and others to help us sort through those things and determine what sort of baseline we should be building to, which is how we even arrived at the 100. Then we went back and tested the 100 with the folks that were living with it and got positive feedback. And so the number had been 100. Where we believed that the miss had been was on core size. And so upsizing the core to accommodate those 2,500 students was intentional and part of this program here, and that's what's actually reflected in the designs for those buildings going forward, is that larger core, because that was the only feedback that we got, was as students were added, the core couldn't necessarily accommodate that. So we did take that into consideration, and again, the refreshing and the evolving, and we're going to go back out and do more of that with folks that are living in those high schools, with the folks that are going to be living in the new high schools that we'll be delivering, and what their experience is, and what they would change, and what they do like, what they don't like, and again, taking all of that into consideration as we're building our long-range master plan.
Thanks. I think it's important for us to know, but I think it's really important that the community knows that that's part of the process, to get that feedback to inform the thinking. And I do think it's important that we consider, what kind of schools we want to build, how many students that are there. I do hear feedback from constituents that schools are too big, and, there's a basketball team. There's only so many people that can make it. My son just found out last night he didn't make his, soccer team. He's tried out 2 years in a row, and it's not that he's not talented. There's just a lot of competition. And so those are real concerns in the community as well, of a desire to have a somewhat smaller school, because as the larger the schools get, the more competition, obviously. I think it's worth noting and for us to take into consideration. I'm also curious, historically, have we made changes in construction after bonds have been approved? Or is this the first time this has ever happened, or has this happened?
It has happened previously, and it's happened as a result of information. A good example of this is McClintock Middle School. When it went on the 2007 bond, it was supposed to be a renovation and addition project, and quite frankly, we found very quickly that we could replace it on site with our new baseline middle school facility for less and more quickly than the renovation and addition project would have taken. And Davidson is another example. Davidson IB, we did not do that project as a result of the comprehensive review, where we did de-scope that because of an intentional community-wide process, where the Davidson IB students were, then that magnet program was reassigned and that building was no longer operated. We no longer needed to spend the money there.
So what you're saying is as new information has come to light, you've been able to renegotiate that or put better thinking forward.
Absolutely. And we do that, quite frankly, even absent these larger conversations. We've got a very talented group of construction professionals who advise us, and we work with only the most reputable general contractors who operate in this city. And the best designers, quite frankly, and we are constantly looking at the design for ways to, something that's called value engineering, but looking for opportunities to save, make some changes even through the design and the construction and the delivery process. We get better at the design and the construction and the delivery process, where we're able to use things like 3D modeling to reduce conflicts and costs. We have clones, which is one of the reasons why this conversation is important, because we did base a lot of that in equity, but we also based it in the fact that if you have the same building and it meets everybody's needs relative to the programmatic requirements for that building, it's much easier, it's much cheaper, and it's much faster to build that prototype again and again and again. And so that's what we do, and that's why we're able, to your point earlier, Mr. Strain, to kind of estimate what that project actually is, because we've done it before and we have that data point.
Okay, and just one quick note, Ms. Lloyd, because you mentioned this the other day, and I think it was really important. I just want to say that I believe our supplier diversity program, that's the MWSBE program, is really impressive at 31%. And I asked you the other day, you didn't mention it, but I just wanted, what's the goal? Usually organizations, they set forth a goal to reach minority, women, and small business enterprises. What's our goal?
Okay, our actual goal is 21%. And that 31% we just spoke of is strictly just for those 17 bond projects that have already started, but we're averaging more like 39.
I think that's very impressive. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
I bet it beats the other entities in there.
So before I go back around, I have a couple of questions myself. I know we're talking about 3 high schools here. The one that is hitting me the hardest is the West Charlotte, because when we added that to the bond, I mean, a whole lot of us worked really hard to get that bond passed, but I personally took some criticism for going to bat to add, because we added West Charlotte to the bond through kind of a different process. And so there were some folks in the southern part of the county and in the northern part of the county that were very critical of me personally for taking that stand, and I didn't regret doing it because it was the right thing to do, because that school deserved, it was a very old crumbling building. Literally, when we held a press conference about the need for the bond in the auditorium, and a piece of the ceiling fell in it was like perfect timing. I held it up at the podium and said, this is why we need a new West Charlotte. I know we've had some design charrettes, and a building has been designed, and we goofed on the communications as far as the 125 versus 100, big time. But a building has been designed with community input, and I just want to be clear, that design compared to the size of Huff right now, it's the same number of classrooms?
It's the same number of classrooms with the 100, but we do have a larger core.
Okay,
because
so
we're
it's
accommodating the 2,500 students.
Okay, so it's like Huff. I'm just using that as a standard because we have a board member with a student there. It's like Huff, but bigger cafeteria, bigger gym, bigger auditorium. Am I understanding that correctly? And it's got state-of-the-art CTE classrooms. Does it have a pool?
It will have a pool.
It will have a pool. So I just want to be clear about that. And with 100 classrooms, we're looking at about opening, in 5 years out, we're looking at about 800 empty seats, according to current projections.
That's right. We would open with about 1,100 empty seats.
Oh, actually opening with 1,100 empty seats.
The 800 extra seats is
It's
after 5
assuming we
years.
fill that with magnets. Okay.
No, it's after 5 years of growth. So
Okay, opening with 1,100 empty seats, after 5 years expecting 800 empty seats. So even if we're off, even if it's way off, we still have empty seats for quite some time.
our
So-
current numbers would suggest that, yes.
So I guess what I need to know is this a state-of-the-art high school with room for everybody who wants to go there for years to come?
Categorically,
100.
yes. It is every bit and more, quite honestly, because it's going to be newer than even Huff and Rocky River currently are.
Okay, because it needs to be something that we are all proud of.
Absolutely.
It's a 5-year growth. It's based on a 5-year growth.
Okay, Ms. Marshall?
I represent the largest high school, my district has the largest high school in the state, Myers Park High School, 3,600 students. We pay principals based on ADM bands. An ADM is average daily membership. Thank you for asking me that. And that means how many students are in a school on a certain day. It's a snapshot. In North Carolina, and Mr. Jeter, you're going to have to help me with this, with some numbers. You're good at this one number. We have high schools in different bands that we pay principals. The state added a band last year. And what was the very top end of the band of principals that get the top pay in North Carolina?
For the giant high
For
schools.
the giant high schools.
The original statute was 1,300 students. They increased it to 1,600 for this year.
So everybody else in North Carolina, their top high school in terms of paying principals is 1,600. So we are paying principals to run high schools that are more than twice that size. It is an enormous task to ask parents and students to be congregated with that amount of people. Now, I'm going to have people coming at me because they don't want to leave their high school, and I understand that. But Myers Park, then Audrey Kell, and South Mac are all north of 3,000 students. I don't think that's good for kids, and I know it feels inequitable for folks that are sitting right over here and looking at us, but let me tell you that we've been waiting a long time too, and that's because we knew this high school was going to happen for years. So we've been sitting with a very large amount of students in the southern high schools for years waiting for a relief high school. We're now starting it. So we did not want to move students twice because we didn't know where that high school was going to go. So we've waited, and we've waited, and we've waited. And so now it is time to right-size these high schools, because I don't want you all at West Charlotte to have 3,600 kids in your high schools. It's not good for kids.
Well, you don't have to have it.
No, and I'm saying when these
Myers
all...
Park, once upon a time, students
and
attended West Charlotte for diversity.
Let's not go back and forth.
Let's right size. I just feel like a 2,500 planning capacity is a good number. And I think many of us would say that overall, just kind of pulling yourself out of this own particular thing. There's going to be movement around in order to get there. But I think the question we're being asked today is, what does a high school that's right for kids look like? And I want to remark too on the site of the South Charlotte High School, just to again talk to the public about where we are right now. We, as everybody knows, we did testing at the Old Providence site. And I personally feel like that site is not large enough to accommodate a high school and the existing elementary school. And a lot of people agree with that, but we don't know where this high school is going to be. We cannot build a high school on land we do not own. So we're trying to be good stewards of taxpayer money and look at exactly where that's going to be. I am very much in the camp of I would like to build that high school in a place where we know we can accommodate a right-sized school, and that it feeds kids in from to be able to relieve all the schools that we're talking about down in the South, because we know that that's needed. So I just want to put my support there to try to find that, to work with our partners in the county to find that extra money to buy the land we need to put that school on. I feel like, I don't know if many of you have ever heard about John Belk's comment on when he was asked as mayor, why are you going to put the airport out there? He said, because that's where the planes are going to land. And this is sort of silly, but I kind of think I have a sense of where that school needs to be, and I would like to put that school on an adequately sized parcel near where the relief needs to happen, because that's where the kids go to school. So that's why I am supporting right sizing. Let's get as close as we can to 2,500, because I think that's right for kids. It's right for kids in West Charlotte. It's right for kids in the South. And I'm thinking about you, and I'm excited about this incredible new facility that's going to be in West Charlotte. I'm excited about this facility that's going to be at the Palisades, and I will be very excited when we get a great new facility in the South, because that's what I feel like is right for kids. So thank you.
So I see Ms. Cheek, then Ms. Sawyer, and Ms. Ship.
I love the term right sizing because it's not upsizing, downsizing, it's finding the right size. I agree with you. It will be a great day of celebration when we find some land to build the right size school down in the South Park. One of our biggest challenges is old schools needing replaced, which West Charlotte was originally on the bond list for renovation, and it was determined that it was going to be a full replacement instead. We still have some other of those 1950s vintage schools out there. So it's a fine line between how much growth are we going to have, and then how do we maintain the equity across the county when we've got West Meck, East Meck, Garinger, North Meck. I mean, my husband and his family all went to North Meck. My stepdad went to North Meck. It opened in like 54. People, that was a really long time ago. That was a long time ago. So I do think that that is our biggest challenge looking forward, is so we have to figure out what the right size is, because if we're going to not just be in the growth model, but also making sure that we replace schools as they just wear out their life cycle. 70 years is a good life cycle for a school. That's a long time. So the big question I've had from some people that were texting me in the audience, in these numbers that we see up here, are EC students included?
Yes, exceptional children are included in the 2019, 20th day
projections.
Numbers, yes.
And then I have a lot of people asking me about workforce development, and thus then we need the need for career technical education classrooms. In the 100 classroom model, especially the one that the Charette, they had the meeting and discussed it, are there CTE classrooms? I think Ms. Dash, you mentioned that, but are there CTE classrooms, science labs, and those type of extra special classrooms being designed in this building?
I can certainly speak to CTE. We, as part of the planning charrettes, Susan Gann and our CTE team participated in those, and we got feedback from both the community as well as the principals in terms of what programs they would like to see in the school. And those programs have then been incorporated into the design. And so when I think about a West Charlotte, for example, they will get a new certified nursing assistant lab similar to the one at Hawthorne Academy of Health Sciences, which is a magnet school that offers that program. They will also have a number of kind of what we're calling a technology hub. So for pathways in computer science and coding, graphic and digital design. In the Olympic Relief School, we got a lot of feedback around continuing the advanced manufacturing pathways. We also had a lot of energy from one of our external partners around an energy and environmental sustainability pathway. So that has been incorporated into the design as well.
So these aren't 100 classrooms with 6 desks in 5 rows. These are classrooms for the 21st century.
Yes.
And to meet the programming needs, which is really the most important thing that we can talk about. Not just the right size, but the right programs. So that was a big question. I hope that I answered that adequately for those in the audience that were sending me text messages asking me. Mary McRae.
Oh, and I apologize. Mr. Schul had his hand up, and I missed you. So why don't you go ahead, and then Ms. Sawyer, and then Ms. Shipp.
On top of the fact, like Dr. Jones mentioned, that it's pretty limiting that we only have a 5-year growth model, I'm curious about the specifics of how we even got the 5-year growth in the first place. Because are we using things like Turner Index, which isn't even a predictive model and isn't even representative of Charlotte when it's national? And like, what kind of specifics are we using to measure this growth? Because people have been talking about Charlotte's like expanding labor market and expanding growth since 2012. Economists and city officials have been talking about that. So what are the specific reasons that we've had like a huge price escalation since the like 2016 or 2017 bond and 2016 like initiation of it?
So I'm going to respond to your question about projected growth, and I will turn it over to Carol and Dennis to respond to your question about escalation.
Okay.
So in terms of projecting growth, right now we have a 5-year projected growth. We've shared with board members, and we'll share further details in the coming weeks, that we are partnering with an organization called Cooperative Strategies to help us project further out, to project 10-year. Right now, what our 5-year projected growth is based on, we use a product called Esri Business Analyst. It's used broadly in municipal planning as well as by real estate developers. And that product uses 2,000 plus demographic trend data points and aggregates them. We also then here look at zoning petitions, rezoning, permitted development, All of that goes into that. Now, what I will tell you and what I have said before publicly is that one limitation of that product is large pieces of land. And so if there, for example, is a family landowner that owns a 100-acre tract of land, and today they're saying it's not for sale, if they decide to put it on the market in 1 year and it gets subdivided and developed, that is not currently in our numbers. We have no way of accommodating that. But when that sale happens, then the numbers will be updated. We have worked closely with the city and asked them to validate our process. They use a different process, and their community viz model is one that we are meeting with them to help inform, because the goal would be that there aren't different processes being used, but that we have consistent numbers being used across both the city and the county. So we want to work with the city of Charlotte, but then also the surrounding towns. So I'll turn to Carol and Dennis now to talk about escalation.
So can you help me frame the question a little bit so that I can make sure I'm giving you the answer you're looking for?
And if I could interject, there might be some confusion between
right, the Turner Cost Index.
What Akeisha Craven-Howell is speaking of is, and she is projecting, she works to try to predict the growth in the number of students. What Dennis Lucaria was talking about was the Turner Index. Turner Index is talking about cost escalation.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, the question was like, what specifically is causing a cost escalation since the 2017 bond at the point where those projections have been made before 2017?
So we could really go down quite a hole going into all of the factors, but I think a lot of it, quite frankly, here was rooted in the Great Recession. There was a time when a lot of work here stopped and prices leveled off or fell. And so there was nobody in the private sector building. We were not allowed to finish the 2007 bond on time because the county also throttled our spending. And when those dollars were not available in the market, a lot of subcontractors, quite frankly, just went out of business. And so then over time, as things started to rebound, there became opportunities for new bids, new projects to be done. Generally speaking, the private sector likes to work with the private sector more than the public sector. We have other requirements. We do things that make our schools a little more complicated. There's a little more reporting. So there's already, and then we choose our builders based on requirements. So they have to demonstrate that they can meet our requirements to even be allowed to bid for our jobs. Then they're going out to a sub-market, and there's no subs there because there was a recession that wiped out a whole swath of tradesmen and other people. And then the ones that were left were quite frankly able to name their own price. And so all of that gets baked in, and then we've seen this growth that's been quite frankly feeding on itself, and you're seeing this in large urbans throughout the country. People are not saying, hey, Greensboro is really affordable, let's move there. People are moving to Charlotte. So those things become things that are feedback loops, driving more construction, which then drives more competition for labor, which drives, again, the price of the materials up because everybody's competing for that same shipment of steel. So all of those factors come into play, and that gets you to this inflationary measure and how we're here.
So is there not like a quantifiable measure of like how much that growth is actually going to be? Is it just like a positive feedback loop that doesn't stop?
So this is what economists get paid to do, quite honestly, and so that's where it's somebody's best guess. And the best guess at the time was it was going to look like about 11%, and the $826 million in projects was going to cost about $922 million, and the guess was wrong. And so we're running at about 20% averaged inflation, not at 11% to date. And then what happens? So I don't know. I don't know if it gets worse next year. I don't know if the curve falls off. I don't know if we hit a recession. All of those things are going to impact those costs going forward. And you don't really recognize, you can project, you can guess, you can predict, but you don't really recognize it until the day you open the bid and you say, wow, this school costs $5 more per square foot than we had budgeted.
So then like obviously I respect the fact that you're giving me a lot of models and statistics here.
Right.
But like the question is like, then like how can we see that this isn't going to happen with the next bond, right? Like, is there any effort to change the methodology for the future then?
Sure, and again, we didn't escalate our bond, so we came up with a group of projects. Our partners at the county helped by setting an inflationary measure that they applied to all of the projects they fund, libraries, park and rec, their own projects, and us, so that everybody was using the same factor. So, like I said, the guess was off. So again, what they'll do is they'll go back and they'll look at trend data, they'll see how it's been, and they'll take a guess based on what the market is going to look like and what it's going to do and project a line. And in 2007, we didn't have this issue because we were comfortably escalated and we were able to deliver the projects. We had a recession that sort of helped us when we came out of it because prices again fell. But what we've seen has been a very steep incline since then, and there's just not a way to know exactly what that's going to look like, unfortunately.
In fact, in 2013, I think we finished those projects with money left over.
Right.
We did. We actually, most projects came in under bid. The other big factor we've had in North Carolina is all the different contractors heading to the East Coast, eastern part of the state because of Hurricane Florence construction. That's been a huge problem.
So Ms. Sawyer and then Ms. Shipp.
I just want to go back to some of the numbers and the capacity for growth and what's included in the aggregate South Charlotte. So that schools includes West Charlotte, Olympic Relief, and the aggregate South Charlotte high schools are what?
It's 4 high schools, Ardrey-Kell, Myers Park, Providence, and South Mecklenburg.
So if we add up the projected extra seats at the 100 classroom capacity, we add 811 plus 491 plus 796 minus 532 plus 894, which to me comes, I got 2,400 seats. So basically,
we're building a whole new school.
An extra high school worth of seats in that south zone. Is that?
Yes, and what's not included up here, is something you asked about earlier, which was Waddell, which is 1,775 seats.
So we, at the end of this, after 5 years, we anticipate having 2 high school, well, one full-size, one 2,500 square student high school plus a boutique high school worth of capacity left over.
Yes.
So that seems like a good number of seats to have to grow into at the end of 5 years. So for the next
Field of Dreams.
So we have, I know that seems like at the 100 classroom that we have adequate space for growth, given that we have 2 high schools worth of empty seats.
Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Shipp.
And I think so much has been said, but I think it's important to say we need these schools to happen. I think we got to talk about our children, and our children come first. And as the young man alluded to from Myers Park, I had a daughter went to Myers Park, and overcrowded. It's very important that our children don't continue to be in overcrowded schools, substandard schools, poor condition schools. I was a principal in those schools. And it was very important that once the bonds were passed, we wanted to quickly see those schools open and children move into schools that are in good condition, that are working, and we can teach effectively in these schools. And I think we have to make that decision to do what is going to be best for all children and get our school buildings open. We've talked about that we're not going to lose anything with programming. We're going to have all the extracurricular. We're going to have everything we need for our children. Why would we not want to get these schools open without delay? I'm very concerned about that. I know what that feels like as a principal. I was in Nations Ford. We do know when Nations Ford opened, 2 years later, we had mobile units. We have a release school that is listed to open up to do that. We need to move on that. And I think as we continue to belabor 100 to 125 to growth, will we build schools on time? 2022, we need Olympic right now is the only high school sitting in that community which is totally overcrowded. It is the largest growing area in the county. And we're still saying, when will we open it? We're talking about growth. We know we're going to have E.E. Waddell there. The Olympic High School will continue to sit there and provide relief. Can we get these schools open and open on time if we look at 100? And that is the Huff model, that's the Rocky River model, that's the Mallow Creek model, and those schools are great schools. And I think we can dream big with West Charlotte. I'm an alumni. I saw the beautiful, layout and slides, and I was excited. And I live in Southwest, and I'm looking to see that new school open as well. Our community needs it. So my question is, can we move without delay if we go with the 100 and we still have room for growth?
As far as the facility schedule, we can. I want to just remind that we still have some funding conversations that we are going to have in order to make that happen, Ms. Shipp. But I think it's a good point, but we can't forget that we want to bring those construction awards to you on the April 28th board meeting for those two new high schools. But we also need to have a hard conversation and a quick conversation with our funding partner to be able to do that as well. There's 5 other projects that are just sitting on desk, ready to go to bring you the construction awards to indeed deliver those on time as scheduled. So thank you for that question.
Dr. Jones?
Yes, I'd just like to respond to this Myers Park analysis about overcrowding. Myers Park didn't have to be overcrowded. They choose to be together and not be open to going where some seats are. So let's take that off the table. Moving without delay for the funding, we got to ask our funding partners for money. 100 classrooms or 125 classrooms. So generally, we can ask for 125 classrooms. And we can look at relieving Myers Park.
But I think to the point that was made, that does present the potential for a delay in opening those schools. And so that's the trade-off. So
more money anyway, don't we?
We do, but the timeline is a separate thing. And I think the one thing that we want to make sure that we affirm to the community is that of all the factors that are under our control, we have every intention of delivering a new West Charlotte High School and a new relief school down at the Palisades and a new relief school in South Charlotte. So those projects will happen.
Do we have, okay, well, Mr. Strain, and then I think we're going to wrap this up pretty soon here.
I got a couple questions on the inflation rate.
Sure.
So the inflation rate that we're experiencing, or the cost escalation rate, if you look at the most critical materials that are used in the construction, right? Steel, concrete. We're not seeing that same sort of escalation rate in terms of steel and concrete in the market as we are in terms of our quotes. So is that all on the labor side? Because if you look at the markets, right? I mean, we can pull up a graph of steel cost and concrete cost. We're not actually seeing that level of inflation.
So what I would caution to say, though, is a lot of those indexes aren't as granular as looking at here in Charlotte. I mean, I'm also on the private side doing development, and I can tell you that it's not just labor. Labor is a thing. Labor is absolutely a thing for a whole lot of reasons. But there are still in this geography and in Charlotte, there are still there's still a lot of competition for materials, which is driving that sort of stuff up, because you've got people that quite frankly are trying to stay ahead of whenever they think the next recession is going to happen, and they're trying to get their project open and sold. So we're competing with those developers.
Yeah, and it's just supply and demand at that point.
Absolutely.
Labor, materials, all
Right.
the above.
Right.
I know Ms. Cheek mentioned, the east side of the
Competing
state
with them.
and, the damage that's been done repeatedly out there through natural disasters. And so I understand the local pressures on those are driving some of the cost escalations. Right. We need to know what it's going to take to buy the land that we need to complete this bond, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a bit of a broken record on that, not just tonight, but for the last 3 months.
You are Mr. Strain.
Then I should get answers, right? I mean, come on. The South County relief has to be between 51 and 485. That's where the students are. It makes absolutely no sense to build it much further north if the primary target of relief is Ardrey-Kell, and then secondary relief up through the South Meck into the Myers Park area. It makes no sense to build this school in Myers Park. I don't know who came up with the idea. I keep coming back to, are some of these proposals, if not all these proposals, being driven by a box that has about $922 million in it, and how do we go about delivering these projects within the budget? We're not going to deliver them within the budget. As Dr. Jones just said, we have to go hat in hand with a number of areas that we've missed on this and go ask for money to do this. So using the, hey, we should build a 100-classroom high school at Old Providence because we don't have the budget to do a 125-classroom high school where it should be down further south is ridiculous. It's wrong on these are 70-year commitments to our community. You build a high school, it's there 50, 60, 70 years, 110, 120, who knows what it's going to be this time. Millions of dollars. We have to make this decision properly and not, hey, well, we're short a couple of million, frankly, because we didn't ask for it in the first place.
And I will agree with you that absolutely there are busts, and there are busts on things that we didn't factor, like the escalation. So, but the larger point is that at no point in time did we say here we want to move from 125 classrooms to 100 classrooms to save $1. And in fact, I hope that I set the table exactly the opposite, so that nobody in here thinks that I would ever come to this board and say, we need to shortchange a child, because that's not the intention here.
And that,
right.
It wasn't my suggestion that you said shortchange a child.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Not at all.
Right.
So, I have been searching for how the decisions were made, frankly, last spring, early summer, that led us to this point.
Right.
When those decisions were made last spring, early summer, this board, or actually the predecessor board, was briefed on that in roughly August. And so the conversations we're having that say, hey, we're forced into this situation now, because if we make a decision and we say we'll go back to, because actually we're missing that word in most, we go back to 125, which is what we originally committed to this community. We go back to 125 classroom high schools, is going to delay it a year. Frankly, we have to own that, because this conversation should have been had last fall.
Yeah, and now we're having it, and hopefully we move forward.
Yeah, we should move forward, right?
Yep.
And we should move forward recognizing what we've committed. And so my final point on this is the analysis for the number of seats required to satisfy the demand on the South County high school would have to take into account what the projected enrollment would be in 2030. It doesn't. It's 5 years out. The school's not even going to be open then. I mean, hopefully it would be, but we'll see it when it happens. And as such, let's be real about what those numbers are, because we're not going to get another high school down there anytime soon. And so we've got to build for what that's going to be, and we know damn well it's going to be a lot more students than are projected on that. And in fact, if we opened a school across the street from Ardrey-Kell today, both of those schools would be 90% utilized the day it opened. And so, I mean, today, it'd be 90% utilized today. So that's where we are. And so we shouldn't be taking 20% of the school away that we committed, which was 125 classrooms. I have yet to find any bit of literature which were commitments to the community that said we're going to build a 2,500 seat high school. Every bit of literature I'm aware of that we sold this bond, you worked very hard, Madam Chair, to sell this bond, said 125 classrooms. Those are the commitments we made to the community.
And we're changing them.
And if you guys want to vote to change it, have at it,
And
right?
we will.
I can't, because I know that those were the commitments, and I seem to remember sitting at this very table in this room where colleagues told me that we couldn't change previous commitments. And I brought forward a proposal to build something that was fully in line, and then colleagues told me, no. This was the thinking at the time in 2013. So it is going to be a beautiful school for West Charlotte either way. They deserve it. They're going to receive it, regardless if it's 125 or 100. So recognizing that it's going to be an absolute state-of-the-art school, it will be either way. And we need to deliver to the community what we committed. Thanks.
Anybody else? All right. Before I turn to you, Mr. Superintendent, I just want to reiterate that I'm looking at the number of empty seats that we're projecting. And if you include the fact that Waddell is becoming a high school again, we're looking at, I think the number here is 4,100 empty seats, which should take care of our growing population of high school students for years to come, including, if Myers Park students decide to, if we do some.
Included in that number.
Pardon?
Myers
Park's included in that number, that's correct, including Myers Park, including Ardrey-Kell. So we're looking at 4,100 empty seats. That gives me a comfort level that we have room to grow. I'm looking at fiscal responsibility at a time when we and everybody else are seeing inflation. And I'm looking at what gets us the best chance at building schools on time. And I want to do right by our kids. I want them to have state-of-the-art facilities to learn in. So with that, do you have a recommendation for us, Mr. Superintendent?
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you. So based on the information that staff has presented tonight, it is my recommendation that the board approve building the 3 high schools in the 2017 bond at 100 classrooms with a planned capacity of 2,500 students.
All right, so now we will move to the action item, part of the agenda. And I turn to Board Member Lenora Shipp to make a motion on this item.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the superintendent's recommendation regarding the number of classrooms per high school as presented.
I second the motion.
All right, do we need any further discussion?
Call the question, please, Madam Chair.
All right, all in favor of the motion, let it be known by a show of hands. I believe that is 7. All opposed, let it be known by a show of hands. That is 2. So the motion carries 7-2, Madam Clerk. Before we move on to the next item, can you show us the, did you have a slide with the planned, that went away?
See if we can
Sorry,
get
I was
that
going to
back
say the
up.
planned.
Sure, well, I
community-
can
sessions.
run back through. So March 9th will be at Northwest School of the Arts. March 11th will be at Providence High School. March 16th will be at East Meck. And March 18th will be at Mallard Creek High School. And that's in addition to other groups.
So we want to do, basically in these community sessions, it will be an update on where we are, where we're headed, and it's beginning the community engagement for long-term.
Facilities master planning process, yes.
Okay.
Chair.
All right.
Madam Chair.
We're going to go on. So to the next.
Really?
Well, we voted.
No, I wanted to ask about Providence High School.
Oh,
We've
okay.
got one planned at Providence. Should it not be at AK?
We're working with the dates that were available at each of the schools and also trying to work around some of the budget workshops that are also being planned. So in order to try and get these first rounds scheduled as quickly as possible, we worked with what we had. We will be back to South Meck. We'll be to other schools. This is just the first set in March.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
But they're going to Mallard Creek, which is
All
not
right.
affected by any of this.
So I now move, let's see, so the next item on the agenda is recommending approval for supplementary funding request for the Career and Technical Education Department. Before we take action on this, I turn to the superintendent to introduce this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, she's already at the podium. Susan Gann, our Director of Career and Technical Education. Would you please elaborate on this particular item?
Yes, I will be brief. We have an exciting opportunity before us in that this grant is the Education Workforce Innovation Fund. There are 25,000 open job postings right now in technology, and this grant, along with the work that we have already done in the field of technology for career and technical education, will allow us to move faster. I'm happy to say that we have 555 students that are opting into our software development or our web app development pathways across 17 different high schools, and we have 4,000 students currently enrolled in middle school in tech coding or app creator to develop that pipeline. Very quickly, I want to introduce one of the key partners that is making this grant application possible, and that's Dr. Kendrick Carroll, who is the president and CEO of BSI Solutions. Dr. Carroll and I met in December, and we had a kindred spirit that we wanted to make sure that every single student that wants to access this opportunity that is absolutely an economic mobility lever gets that access. And so to do that, we need to make sure our pathways are not only aligned, but they have every part that we need. So this grant will allow us to not only align with industry, which BSI has committed to do and has actually brought on a resource to do this for us and to project manage. We will also have capstones developed and lab experiences so that students have a portfolio. On top of that, they will also be trained, as well as our teachers, on how to project manage in a coding and software development environment. And I think that makes our students highly marketable and also having lots of options, whether they want to go directly to work, whether they want to go to a 2-year, or they want to go to a 4-year. We are partnered with CPCC, and I'm also happy to report that we have letters of support from Bank of America, Lowe's, Red Venture, and Duke Energy to support the work. And also this afternoon I received one from Johnson C. Smith. So I think this is a very well-supported community project, and we're really excited to see where it goes.
And this is covered with a generous grant, correct?
So the grant is $60,000 a year for 5 years, and the match comes from BSI in the form of their personnel hire.
Awesome. All right. Thank you very much. Do we have a motion is there a motion to approve supplementary funding, the supplementary funding request for the Career and Technical Education Department?
I make a motion, we approve such funding.
Is there a second? All righty, all in favor, or do we have any more discussion? Yes, Ms. Cheek.
I meant.
Oh, you meant,
I'm voting.
any more discussion? Okay. All in favor of the motion, let it be known by a show of hands. Any opposed? And that is 8-0 unanimous. We don't have Dr. Jones in the room. All right, thank you very much. So I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All in favor, show of hands.
You're here?
Any opposed?